Welcome back, folks, to the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast. On today's show, we had Brian Liebel and Ruskin Hartley from the IES and IDA, respectively. That's the International Dark Sky Association, son, if you're listening to this. And this was a good one, man. The street met the ivory tower. We talked about trade-offs, Greg. What else did we talk about? Holy mackerel.
Talked about light pollution. We talked about, just, the principles that we need to consider when we're looking at exterior lighting.
Yeah, man, we got to teach those 5 principles in the upcoming Nailed course that's coming out hot soon, man. Those 5 principles are going to be taught. So, but before we get into this wonderful conversation, what an honor it was for us, we got to talk about Keystone Technologies. Go to KEYSTONETECH.com, KeystoneTech.com. Big news coming out of Keystone.
Hey, light made easy is their motto, their theme, right? They are now making exterior lighting easy. They're coming out with a line of exterior fixtures. They're going to, and what I mean by easy is they're going to reduce the number of SKUs you need because they're going to make them color selectable.
Get out of here.
On a number of them. Oh, yeah, 3, 4, and 5K. We're talking about the Kelvins in this podcast today. And then also they're going to have different wattages, lumen packages, everything you need, floods, wall packs, area lights, all the good common stuff that's out there. You can now get at Keystone. Coming soon, I should say, versus now. But by the time you hear this, it'll be just about now that you can buy that thing.
You know what the good news is about that is you can put up that 5,000K nasty that the guy wants and then go back to him and say, dude, can I just really adjust these to 3,000? Mm-hmm. Because, it's kind of nasty, that 5,000 kit. And you don't really need it. And look, I'm going to turn the back on a 3,000K and you tell me if you can see any less.
That's right.
You get the guy set up right.
Yeah, and the best part about it all is if there ever is an issue, and I deal with exterior lighting issues a lot, as I'm sure a lot of distributors do when you put an LED fixture in. Good luck finding that driver. With Keystone, you know the driver. Oh, it's a Keystone driver.
Come on, man. You got to go to KeystoneTech.com. Just go there right now. KeystoneTech.com, baby. That's KeystoneTech.com. The kings of outdoor lighting now, Greg.
They're coming in hot.
Haha. And of course, the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. Go to NAILD.org. Keystone's a proud member. Oh, baby. GetAGripOnLighting.com. Welcome to the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast. Brian Liebel and Ruskin Hartley.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Good morning.
Hey. So Greg is going to start us off here. He has some questions, I think, for Ruskin first. Isn't that right, Greg?
That's right. Well, first of all, happy Earth Day. I think that's today, right?
Yeah, that is today. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah. So when we when this will actually be released, it'll be sometime in May. But right now it's April 22nd, so Earth Day. We're celebrating. Yeah. Wanted to talk just a little bit about the International Dark Sky Association. Yeah. So Ruskin, I'm guessing you're going to help us out on that. So what is your role there right now?
So I joined last year as the executive director. So I report to the board and oversee the staff and really driving our initiatives forward.
And what year did the International Dark Sky Association start?
We were founded just over 30 years ago by an amateur astronomer and a professional astronomer here in Tucson, Arizona. And from those small roots, we've now grown into an organization with members and supporters on every continent.
And what made them start it, I can guess, but share the story.
Well, the story I've heard is Tim Hunter was an amateur astronomer, and he also happened to be he's a physician. And he heard that the hospital that he was working with was going to put up some pretty horrendous lighting. And the lighting was going to impair his ability to use a telescope from his backyard. So he went and talked to them and said, "Can we do something about this?" They said, "No, not really." So he looked up to the hills above the mountains above Tucson, which, as you might know, has a kind of world-class astronomy research center, and he went up to Kidd Peak and met with Dave Crawford, and Dave Crawford was the manager of Kidd Peak, and they talked further about what could be done for this. And I think initially, the story I've heard from the professional astronomy community, they really weren't concerned about light pollution at that point because of the technology it used. They could kind of filter out those old single band elements, but in conversation, they realized that there was something here. And given the growth of Tucson, the growth of light pollution, they came together, decided to do something about it and advocate for simple changes.
Yeah, you probably don't know the answer, but I've got to wonder, as a lighting dork in 1990, what possibly could it have been that was horrendous? Big metal halide lights? I wonder.
Probably metal halide. I'll have to reach out to Tim and ask the specifics, but I think it was more They were going to light, the classic thing. They're going to light up the hospital, make it look beautiful, point the lights up into the sky rather than keeping them down on the ground. I think it was something as simple as that.
Yep. And what is your primary purpose?
Our purpose is pretty simple. We're all about protecting the night from light pollution. While we started we have roots in the astronomical community. We still have a lot of support and do a lot of work with them. We have much broader range of constituents now, and it's great, in fact, to be talking to you on Earth Day, because many of the people who support this work because they're concerned about the impact that excessive light at night has on wildlife and nocturnal species. In fact, Earth Day, half of Earth Day is night, right? And
That's
artificial light at night is, by definition, artificial in terms of the electrical light, and it's a novel environment for many of these creatures.
Very good. And then it brings us here to Brian and the IES, and this is an exciting topic that I saw come across that you guys recently announced a partnership or collaboration. Can you kind of give us what that's all about, Brian?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think that the IDA and the IES share a lot of members in common. The IES membership is almost 8,000 strong, and many of our members are International Dark Sky members as well. And so we have a lot in common in terms of what we do with our standards and our standards development, and the members of our society wanting to respect the dark sky and encourage dark sky lighting design. So having us get together is a natural collaboration. We're very happy that we're able to do this and work together on ways in which we can promote good lighting design that also reduces night pollution or light pollution at night.
So you guys came up with, is it 5 principles or 5 principles for responsible outdoor lighting? Can you share those with us?
Be happy to, and then chime in, Brian. I mean, it's pretty simple. It kind of makes sense. And the more, when I started talking about this with Brian, is one of the things we realize is, certainly from our side, many of our members, they never get to see quality lighting. Our exposure is often to poor lighting and poorly thought through lighting. So we thought we need to put some really simple principles that anyone could understand and could be applied at any scale, be that a homeowner or be that a municipality or a nation. And it's really, that there are 5. And the first is it useful? What's the purpose for the light? If there's a purpose for the light, then follow these other principles. And then you're really about into reducing light pollution there. So target it, point it down. Don't point it up in the sky. Clearly aim it to where it's needed. One of the things we've noticed is there's chronic overlighting of our world. Overlighting actually causes our pupils to shut down and doesn't increase our safety. So we encourage people to use the lowest light levels possible. And Brian can talk more about the work IES is doing to really understand what are appropriate levels. The 4th is really about controlling it. Your light that you have on, that you want when you come home so you can get in safely into your house, doesn't have to be on 24/7. So we encourage people to think about putting them on controllers, either motion controllers or dimmers. And the 5th is really about the color temperatures, about managing the spectrum, and really a preference, particularly from a perspective of wildlife health and also our ability to see the skies and the cosmos, is really have a preference for the warmest color lights possible.
Yeah, so I can chime in on this too. In terms of developing these things, we really did take a lot of thought, and really this is where I think our organizations, in terms of our membership, coalesced really well. The idea of focusing light where it's needed and when it's needed, it just comes down to that simple concept, right? And to be environmentally conscious, socially conscious about how we use the light in a more designed way. You can think of light pollution in many different ways, but at the end of the day, it's wasted light if you don't follow these principles too. It's not helping anybody. And so if we do this, we also gain the advantages of better energy efficiency and better utilization of this asset that we're spending a lot of money on. So at the end of the day, it's environmentally conscious, it's social conscious, it saves money, it's the right thing to do.
Ruskin, so I felt like with the IDA and the broader lighting community, the broader lighting community, that there was some resistance to dark sky compliance in the beginning with your mandate from the lighting industry. and that the lighting industry is very diverse. So you have distributors, contractors, manufacturers, and somewhat resistant. Now, I don't want to go into that because we're obviously, when the IES and the IDA are married together, you're talking to the number one lighting organization in the world that then dictates down to the distributors, which is our association, and the contractors and all this sort of stuff. But is it time to bring the EPA into the conversation? Because you mentioned waste. Is light pollution, that word has commonly been used as more of a metaphor rather than an actuality, right? But is wasted light at night hazardous waste?
That's a great question. I mean, I just address a couple of things in kind of your lead up and your preamble. I would say that we haven't exactly seen resistance from the industry. I mean, it's obviously a broad, diverse industry. It's big and it's global. And also, I've only been involved in this about a year. So take this to what it's worth. But we don't really see resistance. We see a lot of the industry coming to us and say, look, we want to produce and develop products that put light where it's needed and follow these practices. In fact, we continue to have lots of manufacturers sign up for a fixture seal of approval program, which is really an independent accreditation that they're following these principles. We're still seeing those come through. We had a couple come through yesterday, in fact. So we're not seeing resistance from the industry. I would say where the area that we have the largest challenge is just the lack of awareness in the public of what the difference between good and bad light. Too many people, particularly on a residential use, choose a light for what it looks like during the day as opposed to how it performs at night. And so that's why we're excited to join with IES to sort of educate both the public and the designers and the architects and the engineers about how you can use quality light to reduce and minimize light pollution. Now, in terms of your second thing, is light pollution a pollutant? Certainly, we would argue that in many instances, light is a pollutant. Well, actually, what's being polluted is natural darkness. It's being polluted by excessive light. And it should be up there in the same breath as we think about air pollution and water pollution. I would say that we're not there yet. Air and water pollution have been regulated for decades here in the US and around the world. Now, we are starting to see some countries start to recognize light as a form of pollutant as well. In fact, Mexico did that recently, and there'll be an adapting regulations at the national and municipal level. But again, we believe that we need both a sort of a top-down approach, but also a bottoms-up approach. We would love to see over time municipalities adopt these principles into ordinances at the state and national level. But we're not going to wait for that. So we really want to encourage people from the bottom up to say, yeah, we want to take this and do it. We don't have to wait for government here. We can do this ourselves. And in fact, the more people that will adopt these principles, the more people will become to understand that using light responsibly actually improves the environment both for wildlife, but also for people.
So you're speaking to two guys that are lighting distributors. So we sell lighting products to the end user directly. And while we consistently encourage our people to sell dark sky compliant fixtures, even a $15 or $20 adder to a project per unit, say, is enough to get your quote rejected by the client, is enough for a contractor to go to the other distributor who isn't pushing dark sky compliant wall packs, say. And so, Greg, I ask you a question, maybe it's a little bit embarrassing, but how much of your outdoor lighting that you've sold in the last 5 years has been dark sky compliant? Would you give us a rough percentage of what you think it would be?
Maybe 30%.
Yeah, something like 30, 20%. And we're talking about a situation where a vast majority of the outdoor lighting fixtures have changed. And so what I would say is that you can only rely on education and awareness so much. At some point, you need regulation. At some point, you need, beyond municipalities, you need an EPA. You need Environment Canada. You need the EU. The EU is the standards gold of the world. You need the EU to dictate and say, no more glare bombs, no more 5,000 K. I mean, the vast majority, if you ask a consumer what color outdoor lighting they want, they're going to tell you 5,000 K every single time. The whiter, the better. Now I deal with end users all the time. I'm like, no. What you really want is 2700K or even lower than that because it protects wildlife and it's better and and there's no difference in color rendering and visual acuity when you're using LEDs. Nope, they still want 5000K. So I think if we're going to accomplish this as an industry, I think the IES the pairing of the IES with 5 simple principles is amazing, but I think we also need to involve the EPA. And we need to involve Environment Canada, and we need them to say no, it's against the law now. And then you would see the vast majority of distributors and contractors be forced to change. And I think that's what has to happen. Otherwise, you're going to continually get the kind of numbers. And Greg Eric's the co-host of the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast, and he can only achieve a 30% rate. I would say mine's even less. Simply because of that cost adder and that the contractors are just going to buy that cheap wall pack. That's one point. The second point is that there's a bias towards, with consumers, people that are not knowledgeable in something looking the same as it did before. So if you have the installed base and you have a Cobra head or you have a wall pack, people are kind of afraid to change that. And they want the new fixture, whether it's LED, to be exactly the same as a wall pack was before, or exactly the same as the fixture was before. And so in order to overcome that bias, you need regulation again. So how do you guys have a strategy for that? And if so, what is it?
Is that to IES or to IDA?
IDA. I think it's both. I mean, Brian, if you wanted to, I think the IES is probably better positioned in a sense to dictate to the lighting industry and to get the EPA on board.
Well, yeah, I can certainly address from our perspective on this stuff. It's interesting, the perspective that you have about, as an example, the 5000K being the preferred light source, because I think that preference is all over the map, depending on where you're from and who you've listened to and what you've read, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And so that is one aspect of it. But I think that, what we do as a standards development organization is that with 50 or so committees and almost 100 standards that we have, the way in which we look at this is as these things have developed, our standards have incrementally been adding different aspects of this all along in terms of light trespass and sky light pollution. We now have the Sky Glow Calculations Committee and actually about 5 different committees dealing with this aspect at different levels, in the new standards in the library when we release it in August is going to have even more. So I think that this is a bit of first developing the base and the science behind what we then project in the standards, which builds the awareness. So the question is, are we there yet? Is this something that we can take and say, this is something that we can and should regulate? Are we there yet? I leave a lot of this up to the expertise in our committees to develop these standards. And once they're there, then they can be advocated as such. And certainly we know that lighting up into the sky and not controlling it and the light trespass, I think that there's certainly there. That's why we had started the model lighting ordinance 10 years ago, and we want to update that now with the IDA and put that into place. Will that become a nationalized effort? I don't know yet. I think that's something that we probably will work at, but we haven't set a strategy yet. We are working, as an example, we'll be working with other organizations like the National Park Service, as an example, to do things to help in those kinds of environments, because that's the sensitive environments, and they have expertise in wildlife and how light at night affects them, et cetera. And, we are looking at a broad platform of things that we can work on together to address this issue. But straight answer, no, we haven't talked about the EPA yet or regulation. I'm not sure that we're there yet. It's my answer. And Ruskin, feel free.
Well, certainly from IDA's perspective, for 30 years, we've worked with cities and municipalities and governments around the world to help them adopt smart lighting policy. We believe that's an essential tool for this. Now, then you can have a long discussion about the enforcement aspect of this. Now it becomes really interesting whether a policy is actually enacted on the ground unless there's broad-based support. So we believe we need both. Policies tend, they will, if they're supported by the public, they're more likely to be successful here. And I think what we have here, and we'd certainly welcome the NILD to come on board, to the extent that Congress starts taking up things that aren't related to the current pandemic, it would be great to go and sit down to them and talk to them about opportunities as they invest in infrastructure to do that in a way that actually saves money and saves the environment and creates a beautiful place. If the industry and an advocacy group and a manufacturer came together and talked to the members of Congress about why this should happen, the chances of success suddenly go up. And that's just talking clearly about the US. Now, the areas of the world where we're seeing the greatest growth in light pollution aren't inside the US and inside Europe. In a sense, we've developed. Light is clearly growing. It tends to be tracking at or around population growth in some instances. It's other parts of the world that are developing rapidly, but we're seeing a rapid increase in light pollution. In some instances, countries might be seeing a growth of intensity and an area of 10% per year. So it's like, how do we also tackle that? And I think that's also a question for the overall industry. Is like, the product that you can't sell in the US, you're just going to go and dump it in another country now. And we hope not. We hope that as countries like continents like Africa start to electrify and bring light to people at night, which is really critical part of the economy as those countries continue to develop, and the ability of kids just to do their homework in the evening. We would like them to learn from the path that we've been on and maybe skip over some of the missteps that we've had.
How do you measure light pollution?
You ask really good experts like people on the IES SkyGlow committee. No, it's actually a really interesting question. And the short answer is there's no perfect way of doing it. There are basically two methods that are used. One is you have a satellite that flies around the world, the Veer satellite, and it takes this, you see in the classic images of the Earth at night. Interestingly, that satellite, I believe the lowest, the shortest wavelength it measures is about 500 nanometer. So a lot of the new LEDs that have been converted over are not seen by that satellite from space. So there's a big hole in that sense.
Yeah, Dr. Chris Kiba told us that. He said that they can't see the 5,000K light.
Yeah, that's
satellite.
So that's why people like Chris Kyber and others are actually using the astronauts in their spare time on the ISS have been taking photos out the window, and there's a crowdsourced project for people to identify those cities and say, hey, that's Berlin or that's Miami, and then they can pick up the color on that and start to add that element. So that's looking down from the space on Earth, and then there's also the measurements of SkyGlow from the Earth looking up into space and measuring the sort of natural variation in the night sky, and then the component that is the electric light, the artificial electric light. And then people like Fabio Falci in Italy, when they put out the New World Atlas in 2016, what they essentially did is they were calibrating across that so that you could have a predictive model around the whole Earth about kind of the quality of the sky at the zenith from the ground looking up.
Have you guys had the DLC involved in any of these conversations, Brian? Because I see that that most of the incentive programs in Ontario, and Greg can speak to Minnesota, they incent the replacement of outdoor lighting without any reference to dark sky policy whatsoever. And so it's purely an energy efficiency play.
Right. But it's a good point. We have not engaged them in this conversation with IDA yet. We have conversations with the DLC, and that's actually a very good point.
Yeah, I think because we're in the middle of aside from the pandemic situation, we were in the middle of replacing all of our outdoor lighting it would be very easy to say it has to be 2700K or whatever, and it has to be dark sky compliant or you don't get a rebate. I think that's a really effective way to, number one, just create awareness about it, because all of a sudden all those people that are filling out rebate applications become aware of the fact that the right thing to do is low Kelvin temperature, dark sky compliant. On top of that, they're not going to get a rebate if they don't do it the correct way. Unfortunately, up until this time and continuing forward, all of the programs are based upon merely energy efficiency, the reduction of wattage.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that you brought up here is as we've talked about this, the social responsibility aspect of it. And if you're talking about utility companies who are giving these rebates, this would be one way of actually talking to them about that as part of what they're doing in these utility programs. Yes, they're energy driven, but the thing is, follow these principles. As I mentioned before, it's going to be more energy efficient because you're limiting the light to where you want it to be. And that would be a natural way to work with them on that.
There's certainly been some indication that the focus, certainly we applaud the focus on energy efficiency over the last decade from a climate perspective, and clearly the scientists and engineers have done incredible work to create these more efficient products. But that single focus on that, I think, has had some unintended consequences. There's some indication, and that there hasn't been the actual consequence, there hasn't been the energy savings that could have been achieved because people have used their budgetary savings to light more of their city. So it's like my experience is anytime you focus on optimizing for one outcome, you have an imperfect outcome. And it'd be much better to look at a basket of metrics and say, look, we want to manage, creating a sustainable planet, a better planet for all of us means, yes, we need to manage the energy part of the spectrum, but we also need to manage the wildlife part of it, and we also need to manage the social aspects of it, and in a more integrated manner.
One of the you talk about integrative is a great point. Great, that's what Dr. Veach calls the new lighting is going to be like an integrative lighting. But one of the things I've interviewed, but we've done over 500 podcasts now, on different topics, not just lighting. Spoke to a lot of futurists and people like that. And one of the themes that it's kind of occurred to me, and you mentioned this sort of indirectly, Ruskin, is that as we try to solve our problems, the solutions we come up with to solve our problems become the next problem. And it's interesting how that kind of goes, So, we need to solve this energy problem. Let's change our lights to LED. And then the 5000K starts introducing this other unintended problem that now needs to be solved. And in a sense, that's a driver of economic growth. As we improve and continue to get better, like people say, "Oh, we're so stupid." Well, we can't know everything in front. We're limited, so we have to learn these things as we go. But the faster we learn them, and the quicker we react, which is why it's so important that the IES and the IDA are coming together and creating simple principles that people can understand, not complicated documents that are difficult, simple principles. The faster we recognize and, take our heads out of the sand, so to speak, and say, you know what, gosh, a lot of that outdoor lighting we did from 2014 to 2019-20 is not the right move, and unfortunately we have to replace it. Well, guess what? That's great news for lighting distributors, actually.
Well, I think that's right, but there's a few things about that, and you brought up the issue of cost at the beginning and going for the lower cost item. Well, LEDs now are, as you know, are the cost of the chips themselves are pretty cheap right now, right? Sure. But putting the optical controls on them, if you want to, sort of get down to how we can really get to the systems of the economics of it, I think that's where the focus would need to be in terms of controlling the lights to be aimed where they need to be, as we said in the 5 principles, right? And then also, I have several engineers that we work with that have been telling me that, when they did the designs with the high pressure sodiums, there was a lot of slop in there, right? Because you couldn't design it to the levels that we have in our standards. So when they replace it based on that same equivalent amount of light, they're still overlighting compared to our standards. And so we can do a lot of fine tuning to get these things done to where the light levels are right and controlled and everything. And when you do that, it takes a little bit more thought and a little bit more engineering. And I say that it can be more economical because I believe that. But a lot of times without that thought process, people are just doing one-for-one replacements and not thinking enough about it. And that's what I think we really need to focus on, is to get...
Or not thinking at all. Not thinking at all, actually.
Yeah.
So you guys, you have the 5 principles, and to me they're in order, as Ruskin kind of stated. First you do this, and you go here. You leave the toughest one, at least in my opinion, for the last. There's the color, and Mike has touched on it a couple times. And in previous shows, we've said what color is best for the customer. It's the one they want, right, Mike?
Whatever color they tell me they want to pay for, right?
Right. But now, what do you guys say? Is there a correct Kelvin temperature? Or you say limit the amount of blue-violet light. What's the right color?
So we Brian had this ongoing conversation. So, certainly from IDA's perspective, once you have made a decision that you need to install a light, they are ordered, but there's not a rank order in them. They clearly all work together. And it's by color being last doesn't mean it's the least important, or by target being, it doesn't mean it's the most important. They work holistically, and certainly my understanding, like low light levels and color work together. Spectrum and how much light you're putting, you manage both of those to the outcomes you want. No, clearly you point it down and you target it, and hopefully you put a control on it. So you can manage it during the day, and then it's like a recipe. And there's a great example from Tucson recently. I mean, Tucson has really been a leader in kind of dark sky protection because of the astronomical industry here. It's worth $1 billion a year or something here in Arizona. It's like bringing a Super Bowl to Phoenix every couple of years. It's really important to the state that they protect that. And when they went to the LED, when they put their new LEDs in place, they really set an objective. They wanted to reduce the short wavelength emissions as an outcome of this project. So they put that as one of the goals of the project as they went into it. And by managing the combination of the lumens that were being put out and the spectral characteristics, and putting some dimmers and controllers in, they're able to achieve that. And there's some early indication that actually SkyGlow measured this distance dropped by 8%. And no one's noticed. I mean, they're dimming these things at night, and because they're different, because of the combination of those two values, they're not getting complaints. No one's noticing. No one's noticing really that there's been a difference.
What Kelvin temp is it in Tucson?
I believe it's mostly 3,000. Okay. But I mean, the other point we'll make, and hopefully get to talk about this, is we want to move beyond CCT and Kelvin as an appropriate measure of what we really care about, which is the spectral distribution of the light. So that's another area that we're kind of aligned on. But
that's a white tower thing. You got to be careful with the white tower diktats. Okay, so for example, the end user of a light bulb is still into cool white daylight and warm white, even though 25 years ago or 30 years ago they started labeling lamps by their Kelvin temperature. So it takes time for these principles, a lot longer than we think, for them to distill down to the people that are selling light bulbs on an order desk or selling light fixtures on an order desk at. And so we have to be careful how quickly we switch. And why Greg's asking for that Kelvin temperature is because he can turn to his guys and say, make sure everything's 3000 K, man. I don't want to hear anything. He doesn't have to get into spectral distribution and nanometers and explaining all this stuff to them. He can just say, just order at 3000 K, man. I don't want to hear about anything else other than 3000 K outside, and make that recommendation to people. So we have to be careful how, like, I love the simplicity of your 5 principles, but we also need, like, we're lighting professionals, and we know that our employees are going to struggle with nanometers and spectral. And
no, there's no argument there. We understand and acknowledge we need to make it simple. But my understanding, and Brian should speak to this, you could have a 3000 K fixture that had more short wavelength emission, had less short wavelength, because you can tune these things, right? The technology is incredible these days. So you could take two 3000 K fixtures, and they would have very different outcomes when you put them out in the wild.
But both of them will be better than the 5000 K. Right? I mean, I don't know. You answer it, Brian.
More likely than not, from a SkyGo perspective, yes.
Right.
Unless you're doing all of the other things right, and you're pointing it down, you're using low light levels, and you're controlling it, then yes, no. If you're putting it out in the wild with no controls and no
so all the lighting guys, all the lighting distributors listening to this went, oh, thank God. Okay, so 3000 K. Yes, okay. Like all those guys said that.
Recommendation for general purpose light for most, unless warranted otherwise, is 3000 K is appropriate these days, and you get the energy efficiencies, and you generally get less short wavelength emissions. But it's not a perfect measure.
Right. So we have had a lot of discussions on this, and the 3000 K is something that we can say is going to give you much better quality all around than the old high pressure sodium. You think about the legacy fixtures that most people are used to, you certainly are improving it. On the other hand, There is research now that's starting to look more closely at spectrum, specifically with drivers, and there may be an advantage for drivers to have a slightly higher color temperature because it allows them to see the target distance sooner, and then that decreases the stopping distance. And so for certain applications in roadway, we think that there's an advantage to having a higher color temperature. And these are typically in the sort of commercial streets, not the residential streets, but in the more commercial streets where your speeds are a little bit higher. And when you consider that 75% of pedestrian deaths by automobiles happen at night, that could make a difference. That could save some lives potentially. If you're going on a 40-mile-an-hour street, that's 20-foot difference in the stopping spot. So there are some things that we look at, and we have worked very hard to look at this in terms of how you do these trade-offs, right? If you do the cutoffs right and you do all these other things, and the 4,000K, if it actually adds that advantage, then would we say no? We might say that would be an application for 4,000 that might make sense. Other applications, as an example, with the IDA and with the sports fields, has gone up to 5,700. So because of those applications, which is why, when I started this with our committees and so forth, the consensus decision on these things, they are really getting into this and learning more about it because of the different research avenues that are going on. And there's a lot to be learned. I know you guys know a lot about, the light and human health and the melanopic response and all those sorts of things. Well, we're finding out that response has much more broad scale possible application in vision, not just in light and health. And so all these things are, I don't want to overstate that they're moving targets, but as we learn about them, we might find that there are some advantages that we will be balancing with them. One of which is perhaps that because that also drives the brightness perception, you could, and we talked about the idea, might be able to use a higher color temperature, but then also lower the light level and have the same vision. At the end of the day, the blue content would be about the same. So why get stuck? And that's where I think Ruskin, was talking about the balance. The spectrum and the light levels are things that we want to balance. But in general, the tendency towards the 3000K is the direction things seem to be going, just from the way of trying to limit the blue content for night pollution, light pollution at night. And that's probably a pretty good balance for most things, right? And the reason it's worded the way it is we want to limit the shorter wavelengths because of the environmental concerns that are surrounding that right now as we know it. And again, even that is evolving. The different forms of wildlife, as an example, some are more sensitized to a series of red wavelengths. There's a new thing that they're finding about birds with the magnetic pole response for how they migrate. Well, that's more in a red band than the blue band, but that's also been shown the blue band to affect bird migration and other things. A lot of moving targets here. Whew. But in general, this is where we land and this is where we agree. And the main and the most important thing is we agree to move forward together on everything that we're doing because we have a common focus on these things, and I think that having both of our organizations together as we drive forward and work on these things together is the most important aspect of what we're doing here.
So Greg's signaling me that that's a good end to the show, but I have one more question. Okay. The color of fire is a warm color temperature. Okay. And I've been searching. So I read a lot of nonfiction books about anthropology and social evolution and Darwinism and all this sort of stuff. And I'm searching for this. I want to know if humans have a relationship to that color of light at night and whether or not there's a comfort level with that color temperature, that warmer color temperature, and if we've evolved to prefer that at night, and there's a calming effect, and if there's a security effect of that color, which for some reason HPS became very, very popular as an outdoor light source when it didn't have to be. It could have been metal halide, right? So why do humans have some relationship to that lower Kelvin temperature at night? Do either of you know that? Have you seen anything about that in the past? And I've been searching for it for a long time.
Well,
Go ahead, and then I'll offer my comments on it.
You start, Brian.
Okay, so humans have evolved over this planet for the last 300,000 years. And about 150,000 years ago, they started harnessing fire. You would think that because we are a diurnal species that we would have a 12-hour sleep cycle on average, 12 on, 12 off. But we don't. We have an 8-hour sleep cycle, and that's because of the harnessing of fire in general, it's believed. And the nighttime fire has actually evolutionary been one of the things that trace back to the innovation of language. And that's how language is developed. And so
yes.
there is something there, I think. There's a couple of things I can send your way to look at on this.
I'd love it.
Certainly, you know, the aspect of how the sleep cycle works would tend to probably give you some indication of that the bluer light makes you awake and during the day, and then as you go to bed at night, that's, you know, the warmer color. You don't have too much blue in there and so forth. I don't know that it's proven yet, but there's some indications just from the way our evolution is that there may be something to it. In a historical construct, in terms of what we're doing, electric lighting has been around for 100 years for the most part, give or take, in our society. This is all new to us. Prior to that time, I mean, there was street lighting, gas lighting, and so forth earlier on and so forth. But the 24-hour society is new.
Sure.
And we are learning a lot about what we've done, both to our species as people, the planet, and the night sky, as we've, built this Earth to become an electrified society. And so it's a very interesting topic. We don't have all the answers, but you know, I wouldn't say that your thoughts on this are all that far-fetched at all.
I would just add a couple of things, Michael. I mean, certainly from watching my kids when we go camping at night, there's nothing like sitting around the fire together. Sure. And they calm and they relax, and it's like it's more mesmerizing than television, right?
Sure,
it's alive and it's warm, and so there's really something in it for there. The other thing that I've learned in the last year of being here is, in terms of our humans' relationship to light, we kind of messed ourselves up on both ends. We spend most of our days indoors under dim light compared to the bright full sun outside, and we spend most of our evening inside plugged into devices and screens. So we have just upended that 300,000-year relationship to light to put something novel in place. And we're 100 years into this experiment. And as you talked about innovation earlier, thank goodness we are starting to learn more about the benefits of sort of circadian lighting. I think we're going to learn a lot for instance, from what they're doing up on the International Space Station. And when we can get those $100,000 panels down here on Earth, we can start tuning the spectrums to actually match the natural cycle that we have grown up for 300,000 years with, and we'll all be in a lot better place.
Well, what I love to, when I speak to the people at the IES, it's interesting because you guys actually, it's a very humble organization, and I mean that as a compliment. Like whenever you encounter one of these committees at the IES, whether it's the color committee, I think it's TM20 or TM30, I can't remember all the different names, but you encounter people that are really searching for answers, like genuinely searching for answers. And it's so refreshing because, you know, in time, especially in this time, these extraordinary times we live in right now, I question whether people are searching for answers and like really looking for the answers to questions. And Brian, you brought up trade-offs. There's always trade-offs. Every time we make a decision on something like this, whether it's to lock down our society or whether it's to change our outdoor lighting, whether it's Kelvin temperatures at a crosswalk, they're all trade-offs. And so we have to be careful that we're aware of them, at least at the very minimum, that we're aware that these are trade-offs. And so Ruskin Hartley and Brian Liebel, thank you for being guests on the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
It was our pleasure and honor. Thank you. Keystone Technologies. Go to KEYSTONETECH.com. KeystoneTech.com. Light made easy.
You had me in a trance with that. I was just listening to that. Very, very good song you had. Light made easy now for exterior lighting. They're coming out with all the fixtures you need: floods, area lights, wall packs, and they're thinking of all the little things that not a lot of other people do. You know, they're going to give you color adjustability. They're going to give you the right mounting kits. They're going to, their floods are going to have yoke mount, trunnion mount, and slip fitters.
Ooh,
So you don't
hey,
have
get all
to sit
technical
there
with
and
me
pick 'em
now,
out.
man.
Yeah, they're going to make it easy for you. You sell exterior lighting, Keystone's got it for you now. So be ready.
Keystone. Keystone.
Uh,
Go to KeystoneTech.com. That's KeystoneTech.com, baby. Keystone Tech. Of course, the National Association, Innovative Lighting Distributors, man, where it all started, son. Got to go there. Nailed.org, baby. Hit it up. Join us. Get associated. We got some hot things coming out real soon for all the LS1 graduate peeps out there. We're going to put you back to work. That's right. You're going to get associated and get educated by Nailed. And finally, Brian Liebel and Ruskin Hartley, IES and IDA, respectively. That's the International Dark Sky Association. Nailed just joined. We haven't told Spencer and the rest of the board yet, but they're joining the IDA, and we're going to work with them on creating educational programs for all you listeners out there. And guess what? I'm going to take them too, and so is Greg, because it's time for us distributors to start participating in this. The days of us having no fiduciary duty to the industry, to not educate people, that's over, son. I just slit the throat. We're going to start getting hot. We're going to expect more from each other, and we're going to start solving this problem incrementally. Incrementalism is the way to go. Let's do it. Do it right. Thanks for listening.
Written on the rectory wall, there's a sign there for all. If you are lost, the Lord is there to find you.